I think, I have to say for the record, I think every episode I say that people either aren't reading, don't like to read, or are bad readers or something of the sort. And I just want to, dear listeners, I believe you can read.
Yes.
I believe you can read. Just expand what reading can be. I promise I'll stop bashing people who don't read, but
Yeah. I mean, people can be, I mean, just because you are a bad reader doesn't mean that you're not reading.
yeah, you're doing your
But
best.
yeah, you're trying. Honestly, people who are reading at all, that's better than most people, you
Yeah.
know?
Hello, poets of the internet. I'm D Soul Carson, and this is Oh Word, the podcast that is interested in craft, poets, their obsessions, and the things that keep them writing. Today's episode is Oh Hybridity. I am joined by my friend K.E. Bancroft. K.E. Bancroft is a writer, educator, and artist from Cincinnati, Ohio. They hold an MFA in creative writing poetry from Randolph College and a BA in rhetoric and professional writing from the University of Cincinnati. Their writing has appeared in Poet Lore, Pleiades Journal, Rhino Poetry, Passenger's Journal, The Rumpus, and more. Explore more of their work at kebancroftpoet.com. Kay, hello.
Heidi Soul.
It's so nice to see you.
So good to see you too.
I feel like we haven't seen each other in person since AWP. Is that
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, it's been a
No, it's,
minute.
yeah, so it's so nice to see you and to hear your voice. What's been going on with you?
Oh gosh, what has been going on with me? Well, my debut poetry collection comes out next year. So I've
Yeah?
been, just working on finishing that. She's coming
Tell
out
the
with,
tell the people what it's called.
yes, it's called Blood Room. It comes out next June with Sundress Publications. I'm so excited. Yeah, we're just finishing editing and I just picked fonts the other day.
Ooh.
Yeah, very excited.
Super excited for you, super excited for your book.
Thank
As you
you.
know, the thing that I have invited you here to talk to me about today is hybridity. I would
Yes.
love if you could tell me in your own words, or tell the people in your own words, what
hmm
hybrid work is in poetry, or what that entails.
Yeah, I think, okay, so I have my own definition of it, which
Perfect.
is getting really freaky on the page. And whether that's finding a document and breaking it and taking it apart in pieces, or using found footage or photography and doctoring with that and using something that already exists, or taking a photo and getting weird with that. Hybridity is all about play and
Mm.
being able to find ways to break something and build something, or break the page, or find a new way to use the page. That's how I define it. And I think it's really fun. I think it's very loose, so I don't have to stick to too much of a definition for it. But I mean, that's how I ultimately perceive hybridity, is that there's a way to break and then rebuild something.
I think the way that I usually think about poetry kind of goes into this. I love what you were saying about play. I think a lot of poetry kind of inherently is based on play, some sort of thing with language. The
Yeah.
way that I usually define poetry at large is any kind of text that engages in rhetorical experimentation. Because I know poetry is a weird genre.
hmm
Because usually if you ask someone what a poem is, they're like, well, it's not prose, except, when it's a prose poem,
Right.
or it's not XYZ thing until it is, right? And
Yeah.
so because poetry can be whatever it wants, the way that I usually try to tell people, like, well, if I think someone's writing a poem, I think they're doing something intentional with rhetoric that's different from how we usually use that rhetoric. So I love
Yeah.
what you're saying about hybrid work. I think a lot about hermit crab poems,
Oh, yeah.
uh, because I think it estranges our usual relationship to those kinds of documents, right? So if someone who has a really good one. Um, Ernest Keon Brown has a poem in the form of a multiple choice test. And I think, we don't typically think of a multiple choice test as a kind of poem, right?
Oh, yeah. But it is
Until you,
inherently.
yeah. And especially when when you're using the form of a multiple choice test as a basis for some other kind of commentary, right? So
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
that's really fun. Do you have any particular kinds of hybrid work that you really enjoy or that you find yourself
Oof.
gravitating towards? I know you mentioned a different kind, like there's documents, there's photos, there's found poems. I don't know if you
Yeah.
have a.
Ooh, I love this question because I kind of dabble in all of them. But I think my favorite is like I find that erasure is hybridity and that you're redacting something and finding something new in it, and that in itself feels hybrid to me. And like the work, I really love visual erasure. So like
Mhm.
the work of Torrin Greathouse with the
Yeah.
Burning Haboon, and also Krista Franklin's work, huge inspiration to me. I mean, I'm everything that Krista does, I'm just constantly blown away. So yeah, I think that that kind of work is what I'm most drawn to, is finding something and finding new elements of something in something that already exists. And even if it's just like erasure of like an article you find online, or whatever. I've done erasures of like medication receipts before, and I
Yeah.
think, I don't know, it's just fun. It's also just kind of like a fun warm up when you haven't written for a while and you're like,
Hmm.
I just need to have something to dig myself into the space of a being a writer again, quote unquote, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
And it's just my favorite thing. I don't know why. I've always been drawn to it. And I also love when people get really freaky with an erasure and they make it super like visually stunning. The work of Tom Phillips in A Humament, I'm particularly
Hmm.
obsessed with because it's so beautiful and it just gets so weird. And sometimes you just draw a random shape on a page and then you're like, damn, that's actually just a poem that I just did. And that's pretty cool. So yeah, I always find myself drawn to that, but also I really love like hyper experimental hybrid work, like Anthony Cody's work or Miter Vaughn, like those titans of just abstract hybridity. Ugh, I could go on and on. I'm obsessed
I'm
with
I'm
them.
I'm really glad you brought up erasure too as a kind of hybridity. I think
Mhm.
very often, and I fall into this sometimes. I think of erasure as it's really its own thing, so I don't even always
Mhm.
think about it as hybridity. But I think there's a
Mhm.
really expansive way of thinking of hybridity, not just like what you're like how freaky you're getting on the page, but also how you're choosing to engage with other texts, right?
Mhm.
So the hybrid nature of interacting with someone else's work. So as you're talking, I'm thinking about Nicole Seeley's book, The Ferguson Report, which is
Yes.
that, yeah, so it's that pamphlet of the actual Ferguson Report. And it really becomes, it's really interesting because the whole book is the entire report, but there's actually only like 7, 8 poems in it, but it's
Yeah.
such a painstaking, like for anyone who hasn't read it yet, if you go and look at the book, you'll find that Nicola is really like she's like pulling out pieces of words and letters, and as you're going through it, like it like slowly unfolds these poems
Mhm.
over the course of this really long and bureaucratic and probably not really interesting to read text. And she makes
Yeah.
these really beautiful poetic pieces. I'm also thinking Chase Begren's
Oh,
Red, which is the
yes.
redaction of Dracula,
I
if I'm
love
not
that book
mistaken.
so much. It's so good. I think about that book all the time. It's so good. I love that. And I
Yeah.
also, Mary Ruefle has a book of poetry, A Little White Shadow, I think is what it's
Mm.
called. The erasure poetry. Obviously, she has a book of poetry. But I love that small, just like handheld pocket-sized book of these whiteout erasures that she did. I don't know, there's something so tactile and hybrid about it to me. It's so funky.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
And that's another really cool thing. Like
Hmm.
we're going off our knowledge of other kinds of text. And there's a really interesting thing too, I think that applies often to erasure poems, but I think you could really probably expand it to any kind of hybrid work.
Yeah.
But when you're using whatever that source material is, like what commentary are we also making on
Hmm.
the use or reconfiguration or redaction or destruction of work? Like what are we
Hmm.
using? How are we manipulating it? There's a lot of like ethical things that go into a lot of these.
Yeah, the ethics of it is really interesting. And I, I've I've done a lot of I've done a lot of sitting with this personally because some of the work that I've done is personal, like
Hmm.
my familial archive, using some like photos and documents from that. And yeah, there's kind of a lot of ethical discussion that goes on with it. I've heard Diana Quaquin talk
Hmm.
about this with her collection Ghost of,
Right.
which is just perfect. She talks a lot about the redaction of people's faces and different likenesses, and talking about people who aren't necessarily in the room.
Hmm.
And I think that that's really important to think about. And I talk about it a lot. And I'm thinking about it a lot when I'm working in erasure of like, okay, how is this in conversation with what the text is originally saying and who was originally here? I think that's a really important part of hybridity too, is really thinking through that source material usage and whether it's photographic or video or sound or whatever that is, really digging into like, why am I using this specific thing and what's the impact of this? And then what's the further implication of that? And sifting through that as you're moving through the work. Because I think if you're not doing that, then it just feels, I don't know, a little bit empty, maybe. I
Hmm.
just feel like it's really important to think about as you move through work in a document.
Yeah, and Dinah Coy Wins especially is super interesting. I mean, is using photographs, which I think
Hmm.
sometimes poets get a little more scared when we're asked to bring a photo
Hmm.
into it. We're like, whoa. But she's doing something so interesting because she's writing around like absences, like physically
Hmm.
on the page, she's writing around an absence or writing into an absence.
Hmm.
And I'm thinking of her poem Triptych, which does that kind of inversing or inverting of photo through the
Yeah.
text and what that becomes throughout the collection, as you're mentioning. So I think about often what we sometimes lose when we move to the page. And luckily, we have so many examples of great poets who find their way to the page and do a lot of really great innovations. And I
Yeah.
think that often even goes into the hybrid work because there's a kind of a sense of freedom or an idea to fuck shit up, to get freaky on the page as you would in a
Absolutely.
performance. But I think, yeah, hybridity on the page is a great example of what that form can achieve, what that medium can achieve, rather, is what I'm trying to say. Do you ever feel intimidated by hybrid work? Not even just writing it, but even when you see hybrid work, do you sometimes get scared or like, oh, how do I read this?
Oh, I don't know if I feel fear. I
Mm,
think I get excited by being intimidated on the page because I think it's just something new that I haven't experienced yet. And maybe that sounds cliche or whatever, but I just, I don't
we love
know. I think,
cliches.
yeah, they're cliches for a reason, right? They exist for a reason. But I think a lot about if I'm going into a collection of Douglas Kearney's poetry and I'm looking at that page, I'm like, yeah, I've never seen that before. And that is like mind-blowingly cool.
Yes.
And I think that I just view it as a way to find new elements of writing that feel cool to me, just that feel like they're fueling my creativity and like how how are these artists thinking? What are their intentions with the motion of words on a page, the way that they're using media, the way that they're making the page the screen, they're making the page
Mhm.
their surroundings. I think it's really exciting. And I think people often are like, well, that looks crazy. How do I even approach that? It's like, just look at the first word and then if move to the next one and see where you land. Cause I think that's part of the point is like, it's not
Yes.
supposed to be this beautiful, polished thing that it's just a rectangle on a page. And that's beautiful in its own right.
Mm.
But I think digging into being a little bit excited and scared is a really good thing.
Yeah. Fear
And
drives us.
yeah, it drives us, it keeps us curious. I was just talking to my dear friend, Dr. Taylor Bias, the other day, and I was talking with her about writing, and we were just chatting about kind of, like how we reignite our love for writing when we have had like kind of a dry spell. And she was talking about how we as writers need to stay curious. And a lot of
Hmm.
writers maybe don't stay curious. And so I think that that's what excites me about hybrid work and how people are deciding to break and reshape is that they're staying curious. And so that helps me stay curious because then I'm not complacent. And then I find a new way to work.
Yeah, there's this great invitation for astonishment
Yeah.
when you get to hybrid work. I know when I get to a poem that I don't immediately understand, I think that I used to feel fear because I felt a need to understand. Like I felt like I had to understand what was going on. And I
Yeah.
think the way that poetry is often taught, especially when you're in grade school, is taught with like, here's what the poem means, here's what this metaphor means. right? And we're expected to just like get it. We're expected to know what the metaphor means, what the image
Hmm.
means, what it's all doing, right? So when you get to some of these hybrid works, which they're not giving me in grade school, they're not giving me Douglas
Mm-mm.
Kearney in 10th grade lit.
They sure aren't. They should
No,
be,
they should be, but they're not. And I
but they're
think
not.
I think it would be so fun in high schools to give more kids hybrid works, to have them experiment with what does understanding even mean? Like, what does it mean
Yeah.
to come to your own understanding of a text? Right?
Hmm.
That's a big part of critical analysis, or literary analysis, is to be able to pull things on your own from what
Hmm.
you're looking at, right? I had a professor who told me, if you don't understand necessarily what's going on in a poem, it's a great opportunity to ask, what is this poem telling me that I have permission to do? Right. So
Yeah.
even when I come to a poem and I'm like, I don't have the slightest clue what this poem is trying to say, what it means, but they're doing this really cool thing with language, or oh, they're doing this really cool thing with image, and maybe I can try that with something that I do understand. I don't know what the fuck they're doing over there, but I
Yeah.
but I can do it.
Yeah, exactly. I think a lot about how my mentors have broken and rebuilt things and how they've inspired myself and many other writers in that way. And so, like, I think about Eloisa Mesqua, one of my mentors, who is just a master of hybrid work, and she's creating all of these stunning video poems. And I'm like, oh man, it makes me really want to like get into Premiere and just like mess around. I don't know. It provides you with new tools that you haven't gotten to explore yet. And on your note of people not knowing how like what's going on in a poem, I think whenever I talk to people who don't read poetry about how much I love poetry and how I'm a poet and live in that space, people are like, well, I just never know what's going on. Like people always say that they know exactly what's happening in a poem, and I'm like, well, people who are telling you that that's bullshit. There's no way that you can have just one interpretation of a poem. It's also subjective. Who's reading it? In what context are they reading it? Are they really sad? Or are they just coming off of a date with someone who they're really into? Like, what's affecting their perception of this poem right now? So I don't know. I think, I just think it's so cool. I don't know. Yeah.
We've talked a little bit about it already, but what are some other like kinds of ways you've seen poets approach hybrid work? Or how even do you yourself approach it when you go to write it?
Oh, gosh. I think it's a lot to do with what you're obsessed with and what kind of space you're sitting in with your work, like what you're working towards in a project, or if you're discovering what the project is that you're working on, or if there is a project at all. I think that it's what I'm obsessed with is what really gets me into it. So like when I was writing Blood Room, I was really delving into like my familial
Hmm.
lineage and like what does like my relationship with the matriline mean and all of these things. And so I
Hmm.
was asking myself a lot of questions, and I was given this box of ephemera that was my grandmother's, and it was like correspondence with my grandfather while he was like overseas, and there were tapes and all these things, and there was this one document that I ended up latching onto because it was like the perfect thing, and I was obsessed with the idea of like it's a military ID document and it has our fingerprints on it. And I was like, okay, well, what if I make this like the structure of a poem, and then that becomes this thing that it's this embedded in the book. And so I did that, and I just became obsessed with it, and I started tinkering with it. And so I think it's like I find a place that I am just constantly writing about, and then I find something that I'm like, oh, this is the thing. And I get really into tinkering with it and breaking it apart and like getting into its guts a little bit. And I think that's really fun.
Yeah.
But I
It's
also, it's scary.
Yeah, I mean, I can only imagine. I mean, part of it's really great when you can see a poet being led by their obsessions.
Mhm.
I think it makes the work a lot more interesting when someone's writing
Yeah.
about something they're really passionate about.
Mhm.
Also allows for a far more diverse kind of field of literature. I like to think that there's not anything too sacred for poetry.
Yeah.
Um, especially when you think about poetry as like almost like its own kind of act of of talking to the divine or spiritual or kind of thing, right? There's nothing to, we can write it down in history records, we can write it down in poetry. Like it
Yeah.
can be poeticized.
Yeah. I mean, I also think I'm thinking a lot about the people that like their hybrid work is inspiring to me. I don't know, Layli Long Soldier, her hybrid work is incredible and she plays with form and breaks it in such unique, incredible ways. And I think a lot of her work is so inspired by like her culture and history and
Mm,
the storytelling in that way. And
mhm.
I think about Eloisa Musco's work and the way that she uses hybridity in her work and shape and repetition and just all of the things that make her work so hybrid and incredible. And it all feels like it's centered around the thing that they love and are quote unquote obsessed with, right?
Mhm.
All of the writers that we've kind of talked about, it's like there is a crux upon which they are hybridizing. We're going to make that a word.
Yeah, yeah.
There's a central thing that they're orbiting around. And so they have this space in which they can play and break and get super weird and find new ways to dig into language.
Yeah. I think hybridity also becomes really interesting, especially for folks like yourself, or I just spoke with Ramika Bingham Risher, people who are working with their familial histories, records, ephemera, those sorts of things, instead of being stuck in like, the sonnet or the ballad or, whatever kind of like the stuff that we're used to. It gives us new ways to dig into that kind of work. And I think expanding our idea of form expands the ways that we even feel that we can engage with those kinds of materials, right? I just love the kind of permission it even gives us to go back to things. It's like now that I know that I can do this with a photograph, or I know I can do this with a pill bottle or a medical form. It's not necessarily like, for example, it's not necessarily a hybrid work, I won't say, but Nicole Seeley has this other poem that I really love. It's called Medical History, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's not a form, but she's going back and she's going through, in the sense, her family's medical history. And it would be really interesting if we were thinking in a hybrid sense, like what would that poem look like if it actually was done in the form of like a medical form, right? Like if we're thinking
Yeah.
about like a presentation or a translation of that work into a visual artifact, what can that look like? I think you talked about this a lot already, but just in case you have any other thoughts, just how do you feel existing document forms, how do those serve as a unique basis for visual hybrid work? Where do you feel
Oh,
like, are there any particular kinds that you see yourself gravitate towards the most or anything like that?
ooh, man, I love that question so much because I don't think that there's a single kind of document that I wouldn't be interested in seeing be broken. I think it goes back to like the basic of the grocery list poem, the receipt poem. Like those are awesome and there's such great entryways into seeing what expansive territory there is for form breaking, which is just so fun and liberating when you realize like, oh, I can just like throw some words in this thing and maybe that could be poems. I don't know. Yeah, I've worked within this particular kind of document before, like the like government agency application
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
so that's really cool because I think it gives you agency in a place where maybe you don't feel like you have a lot of agency, which I think is really fun. But yeah, I think every kind of document, like I want to see someone make something out of like a birth certificate or like an adoption
Yeah.
form or like or
I want a
just
brochure poem. I wanted
yeah,
a brochure poem so bad. Once again, I'm
yeah,
not doing it, but I
yeah.
want
No, I
someone.
yes. And like I think we're also kind of entering like a zine territory, right? Because zines are
Hmm.
awesome. And
Shout
that's
out
just
Summer Farah, one of my favorite zine makers.
yeah, I mean, listen, I love a zine. I love a zine so much. And I mean, you could truly make anything of like any kind of document poem, and I think I would be kind of into it because I think it just when you remove some of the content or all of the content and leave some intentionally, there's
Mhm.
so much weird wiggle room to play in because there's already a scaffolding upon which you can
Mhm.
play. It's a new linguistic jungle gym because there's not a structure like that before. So it
Yeah.
gives you a lot of agency to move about it in a way that nobody else has before. So I just want people to be playing in documents. I just want them to get super weird. Like, I don't know, look at your tax form. Look at a
Yeah.
donation request form. Look at like a sample ballot you get from your local election office. I don't know, just
I am working on a ballot poem. I am working on a
nice.
ballot. And it was because I saw something, or I had a poem where I had like a series of questions or something, and I was like, you know what would be really good here if this became something else.
Yeah, I mean, like a dotted line, sign me up.
I love the idea of call it a poem and see what it does to the thing, see
Yeah.
how it changes our perception of it, our reading of it. I think that's great. And I would like to thank you, Kay, for your wonderful time. I think we're nearing the end of this episode here, but I would love if you could read a hybrid work of your own.
I would love to. Applicant. To obtain, use, distribute on slab, fingers roll, nail to nail, avoid fingers. Be sure impressions are recorded. If a deformity makes it, make a notation to that effect in the individual. If some condition makes it impossible to perfect, submit the best that can be with a card explaining the circumstances. Examine prints to see if they can be the most, fall into patterns. Other patterns occur infrequently here. 1, loop. 2, whirl. 3, arch. Center the lines between they must show. These lines running between must clear. Using this type of position in space, of defense, and initiating this will make no entries in, and such will be made concerned, will address, name the designated, the particular, or the search.
Thank you all for listening to this episode of O Word Podcast, produced by me, Diesel Carson. If you are interested in this topic, I've added some folks recommended by our guests in the Substack post. The music for O Word is provided by Esoteric Creations. Check them out on Spotify.